Should we start? Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala, thumma amma ba'd. To proceed. So, inshallah, resume our classes today. Inshallah, we'll go over some of the other subsidiary branches or subsidiary maxims of la darar wa la dirar. There should be no harm or reciprocation of harm. We finished last time up to يتحمل الضرر الخاص لدفع الضرر العام. Private harm is endured to avert public harm. Private harm is endured to avert public harm. So this is more specific, of course, than يختار أهون الشرين, but it is related to يختار أهون الشرين. Remember, يختار أهون الشرين, the lesser of the two evils is chosen. The lesser of the two evils is chosen. So isn't this related to يختار أهون الشرين? It is, but it's a bit more specific. We've determined here that الضرر الخاص is أهون الشرين. Private harm is lesser evil than public harm. And this has many applications. To begin with, all of the punishments, all of the hudud and the legal punishments are meant to do that, are meant to basically to reflect that concept. الضرر الخاص, that the private harm that will be endured by the criminal or that will be endured by people in power or anyone who violates the law. Laws are meant to protect the society from people who may violate them and keep them in check. So criminals and people of power and wealth, if you left them unchecked in a society, then certainly that is not conducive to order and civilization to thrive. So يتحمل الضرر الخاص, in this case, private harm should be endured to avert public harm. And that's the idea behind the hudud and behind all the legal punishments. We have many other applications. So if one of the applications, for instance, and these things may look a little bit different to you because you live in a liberal society, but even in a liberal society, when push comes to shove, they will eventually uphold those principles because they ought to be upheld when needed. So if you have people like, if you have a need for a particular profession and people who are practitioners of that profession decide to give it up, you can force them to do it if there is a need for fair compensation. If, for instance, people go on an army expedition and they leave their lands behind. And these are, examples from the past. But when people went on military expedition, many of them were volunteers. They left their lands behind. Their lands needed to be cultivated. So the ruler can force the farmers to tend to their lands and to, take care of their lands and cultivate them for them for, again, a fair compensation. The idea here is you're trying to avert harm without causing harm as much as you can. You try to avert harm without causing harm as much as you can. So you demand of them to cultivate the land of the people in the military or until they come back for a fair compensation. Also, al-muhtakir, the person who hoards, you could translate this as monopolizers or hoarders. So the people who hoard goods that are needed. The thing is, for muhtakir, the goods need to be essential and needed, not any goods. So if you hoard goods that are not needed, tahsiniyat, luxuries, things of that nature, then that's not a muhtakir necessarily. But if you hold goods that are hoard, goods that are needed by the society, that is ihtikar. And in this case, you may be forced to sell them at a fair market price, fair market value. Also, one of the, here, your private harm was tolerated to avert public harm. Also, to target enemy troops, even if they have human shields. Like, so if enemy troops basically have Muslims among them used as human shields. In this case, it would be still allowable to target them if there is greater harm to the Muslim army, by not targeting them. If greater harm will ensue to the Muslim army by not targeting them, then it's allowable to target them. And collateral damage in this case would be tolerated. Banning, corrupt muftis and ignorant physicians and people of that nature, or ban corrupt transporters, al-mukari, al-muflis, bankrupt transporters. So anyone that may cause harm, people are unaware that this mufti is not a good mufti, or this physician is not a good physician. To ban them from the profession is private harm that would be tolerated to avert public harm. Also, imposing price controls. Imposing price controls is not the dominant position in the madhab. So the madhab does not allow tas'ir or imposing price controls, but there is a variant position within the madhab that will allow for tas'ir or price controls. And that is the position that was chosen by Imam Taqiyuddin, rahimahullah. So all of this is private harm that has been tolerated to avert public harm. The next قاعدة is من أتلف شيئا لينتفع به ضمنه ومن أتلفه دفعا لمضرته فلا ضمان عليه. Whoever destroyed something for personal benefit is liable, but if he destroyed it to avert harm, there is no liability. So this is al-Qa'da al-Sa'diyya number 36. And we will go over al-Qa'da al-Rajabiyya, Ibn Rajab's Qa'da number 26 now, inshallah. But first, the evidence for this Qa'da. So when you destroy something to protect yourself from harm, you're not liable. So the evidence of this Qa'da is the permissibility of killing an assailant without liability. So there is a known hadith where Abu Hurairah reports from the Prophet ﷺ that a man came and asked the Prophet ﷺ, what if a man came for my money? He said, don't give it to him. He said, what if he fights me? He said, fight him. What if he kills me? You are a martyr. What if I kill him? He is in the hellfire. So in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ gave a permission to fight for your money. And if that even went all the way up to killing, then you're not liable, neither here nor in the hereafter. And if you're the one to be killed, you'll be a martyr. And that's an important concept. The concept here is that, societies that tolerate oppression are societies that are wicked, that will, that are basically destined to complete sort of failure and chaos. So we have concepts of that nature where you trade security for justice, or justice for security. So that's a very powerful hadith, isn't it? Yeah. And this hadith was reported by Ahmad and Muslim. So when they say the hadith, why do Hanbalis start by Ahmad if it is reported by Bukhari and Muslim? Of course, because they are Hanbalis, but not only that, but because also uh, a, a hadith that is reported by Imam Ahmad without commenting on it, without him indicating its weakness, commenting on its weakness, there is a disagreement within the madhab. It's reported, this disagreement is mentioned by Ibn Muflih in al-Adab al-Shar'iyya. There is disagreement in the madhab whether that would count as a position for Imam Ahmad or not, simply by reporting a hadith without saying it's weak. So whether or not it counts, Ibn Muflih even says, al-adhar annahu la yukhalifuhu. The more apparent, it's more apparent that he would not disagree with it. He would not basically deviate from it, from the the meaning or the implication of a hadith, meaning of or implication of a hadith. At least what we, because Imam Ahmad sometimes it's subject to controversy because Imam Ahmad in his Musnad collected the hadith, not necessarily those he believed to be particularly authentic or believed it to be particularly actionable, but he just wanted to collect all the hadith that he heard. Yes, al-Musnad would not have mawdu' a hadith, although that also is subject to disagreement, but the hadith of al-Musnad are not, there is not basically any sizable portion that is mawdu' or very weak. Yet, that's a whole different discussion. But the point here is, at least these hadith can be used for tarjih. At least if you have two positions from the Imam, and one of them is in agreement with a hadith he reported in al-Musnad, one of them is in agreement with a hadith he reported in Musnad, then you will favor the position that is in agreement with the hadith that he reported in al-Musnad. So that's why they do mention it, because it's consequential in fiqh. So it's not just a matter of courtesy to the Imam, it's consequential in the madhab. Ibn Rajab's 26th principle says, من أتلف شيئا لدفع أذاه لم يضمنه وإن أتلفه لدفع أذاه به ضمنه. So, whoever destroyed something to repel its harm from himself bears no liability. However, if he destroyed something to repel harm through it, he is liable. So if an animal attacks you, if a camel attacks you and you kill the camel, are you liable? No, you're not, because you basically destroyed it here to repel its harm from yourself. If you are starving and you find the camel in the desert and you slaughter it and eat it, are you liable? Yes, you are, because here you repelled harm through it, through the animal, but the harm was not being caused by the animal. It's independent. Okay. So, if the same applies to a pilgrim in a state of ihram who kills a game animal that attacked him, versus someone, a pilgrim in a state of ihram who's starving and then kills an animal for food. Also, if you shave your head due to harm caused by lice, are you liable? Yes, you're liable. What if a hair grew into your eye, started to poke you in the eye? You could pluck that hair and you're not liable because the harm was being caused by the hair itself. If you have a ship, for instance, if a ship is about to sink and you take the belongings of someone else and throw them overboard, no, like, like you agree on, like you get together and you decide that something needs to go. and you throw something overboard, are you liable? Yes, you are liable. But if you are on a ship, or if you are on a ship, and the belongings of someone else fall on you and then you push them into the sea, are you liable? No, you're not, because you repelled harm from yourself. Harm caused by the item itself that was destroyed, which is different from repelling harm by destroying the item. Okay, then removing thorns. Ibn Rajab mentions this, basically the thorns of the haram. If you pluck the thorns of the haram, are you, he will say that you will not be liable, but the position in the madhab, the mu'tamad, according to the later scholars of the madhab, is liability, is that you're liable, because لا يختلى خلاها ولا يعضد شوكها in a report, that even the thorns of the harm should not be removed or plucked out. Then in the 27th maxim, in this case, this is an example of what? A maxim that was being, an exception that was being made from a maxim because of the text of Revelation. So is the maxim consistent? Yes. So what about this exception? This exception does not mean that the maxim is not consistent. It just means that it was overruled in this application by a text. Also in the 27th maxim by Ibn Rajab, من أتلف نفسا أو أفسد عبادة لنفع يعود إلى نفسه فلا ضمان عليه وإن كان النفع يعود إلى غيره عليه الضمان. Which means if someone destroys a life or invalidates an act of worship for a benefit that returns to himself, he is not liable. However, if the benefit is for someone else, then he is liable. That sounds bad, right? Until you know what it means, because if you destroy or basically destroy a life for a benefit that returns to you, you're not liable. But what he means is these are the applications anyway. So if you're a pregnant or a nursing woman who breaks her fast because it makes her too weak, it causes her harm, the pregnant or breastfeeding woman, she's basically breaking her fast because it causes her harm. What does she need to do? Makeup, according to the madhab, according to the madhab, makeup. Does she need to expiate? Kafara? No. What if she does this in the interest of her fetus? What does she need to do? Oh, both makeup and expiation, according to the madhab. This is controversial still, and we will see more of this, controversy. They will mention more. Alhamdulillah. So it is confirmed. They've been saying no handshaking because I woke up with a sore throat. So I probably caught something on my way back here. Anyway, no handshaking. Okay. If someone saved a drowning person, you save a drowning person, and water gets into your mouth, and let's presume, because that's subject to this agreement, that this breaks your fast. This breaks your fast. Should you also offer expiation? Yes. What if you become too weak yourself and water gets into your mouth? You don't need to offer expiation, because in the first case, it was for someone else, and in the second case, it was for yourself. So you do not need to offer expiation. What if you kill an assailant to protect yourself? Are you liable? No. What if you kill an assailant to protect someone else? Are you liable? They will say yes. However, there is disagreement in the madhab. There is disagreement in the madhab, and he will mention here that in al-Fatawa al-Rahabiyat, he will report from Ibn Aqil and Ibn al-Zaghuni in a book called al-Fatawa al-Rahabiyat that you will not be liable, even if you kill someone to protect someone else, like an assailant that is basically attacking someone else, another person, and you push the assailant away. You have, like, you end up killing the assailant to protect that other person. Would you be liable? Liable here means what? Liable financially. It's not like you're going to be killed, because like in either case, but liable financially. So if you're pushing the assailant away from yourself, you're not liable by agreement, But if you push the assailant away from someone else, then you may be financially liable. But he says in al-Fatawa al-Rahabiyat, so al-Rahabiyat comes from what? Al-Rahba is a town. So al-Rahabiyat is in reference to the town. So if it is one fatwa, it would be al-Rahabiyya. But since there are many fatwa, they are al-Rahabiyat in relation to al-Rahba, which is a town. So Abu al-Khattab, so who said that you would be liable? The person who said that you would be liable is Abu Ya'la. Abu Ya'la said you will be liable. Abu al-Khattab in al-Fatawa al-Rahabiyat said you should not be liable, even if you're killing to protect someone else. I'm sorry, Ibn Aqil and Ibn al-Zaghuni. Ibn Aqil and Ibn al-Zaghuni said you will not be liable. And the next one is about taking an oath to protect yourself, like, or taking an oath to protect someone else. Is the oath binding? The same story. If you take an oath to protect yourself, someone tells you, say my wife is divorced, say, if I have done this, my wife is divorced, or something like this. To take an oath to protect yourself. Is the oath binding? No. Given that you are oppressed and you were forced to take the oath by an oppressor, so you're not liable in this case. To protect someone else, if you take the oath, is the oath liable? Abu Ya'la would say in cases you are liable. If you kill an assailant to protect someone else, if you take an oath to protect someone else, Abu Ya'la would say you're liable in both cases. Now, who disagreed with Abu Ya'la? In the first case, the assailant, Ibn Aqil and Ibn al-Zaghuni. In the second case, the oath, Abu al-Khattab and Ibn al-Zaghuni. And just to give you an idea about, the fact that you don't have to follow your teacher. If you believe that your teacher is mistaken, you don't have to follow your teacher. Because who are these people in relation to Abu Ya'la? They're all his students. So who's Abu Ya'la? Abu Ya'la, who died in 458, is the student of Ibn Hamid, and Ibn Hamid died in 403. And then Abu al-Khattab, who died in 510, is the student of Abu Ya'la. And Ibn Aqil, who died in 513, is a student of Abu Ya'la. And al-Qadi Yaqub, Ibn al-Zaghuni, who died in 527, is the student of al-Qadi Yaqub Barzabini, and who is a student of Abu Ya'la. So these fellows who are the students of Abu Ya'la and the student of Abu Ya'la, they disagreed with him. They said that if you take an oath to protect someone else, unlike Abu Ya'la, we believe that you should not be liable. If you kill someone, an assailant, to protect someone else, you're not liable. And if you take an oath to protect someone else, the oath is not binding. So you'll find here Ibn al-Khattab, Ibn Aqil, Ibn al-Zaruni are disagreeing with, the most important figure of the madhab in his time, who's Abu Ya'la, direct student of Ibn Hamid. They're all his students, or even the students of his students. So is this chapter clear? This chapter should be clear. So the default is that, the last point in the chapter, to protect yourself versus protect someone else, is a little bit controversial. But the previous point is still a valid point, still stands, which is what? If the harm is causing by the thing that was destroyed, the thing that was destroyed was causing the harm, you're not liable. But if the harm was caused by something else, whether it is hunger causing you harm or something else, the ship is again is sinking. So the harm is not necessarily caused by these particular belongings or items. Then in this case, you would be liable for the destroyed property. Okay, then the next one is درء المفاسد أولى من جلب المنافع عند التساوي. درء المفاسد أولى من جلب المنافع عند التساوي. Repelling harm takes a precedence over bringing benefit. Repelling harm takes precedence over bringing benefit when they are equal. When they are equal. And that's, like in healthcare, they first do no harm, right? First do no harm. But that's like a sort of like a universally accepted concept. A universally accepted concept. However, when we say when they are equal, this is an important, exception from the rule, or an important contingency. Why? Because some people may think that repelling harm is always given precedence over procuring benefit or bringing benefit, which is not true. Because harms and benefits come in different sizes. They have different significance. So there are huge benefits, there are small harms, there are huge harms, there are small benefits. So you'll have to figure out if the harm and the benefit are of the same significance or not. Because eventually you may tolerate some harm, some small harm, to bring about a great benefit. So this expression is better than the usual expression that is being used, which is درء المفاسد مقدم على جلب المصالح. The usual commonly used expression is what? درء المفاسد مقدم على جلب المصالح, full stop. There should not be a full stop. The rule, the principle has to be, or the maxim has to be completed by saying عند التساوي, when they are equal. And if indeed avoiding prohibitions takes precedence over bringing benefits when they're equal, because the Prophet ﷺ said, إذا نهيتكم عن شيء فاجتنبوه وإذا أمرتكم بشيء فأتوا منه ما استطعتم. When I forbid you from something, desist, refrain. And when I order you or command you to do something, do of it as much as you can. So it seems that there is more emphasis here on prohibitions, right? The Prophet ﷺ is saying, desist, refrain, stop when I prohibit you from something. But when it comes to orders, he's saying, do of it as much as you can. So does this mean that doing the obligations always is subordinate or inferior to abstaining from prohibitions? Absolutely not. It just means that the emphasis here on abstaining from prohibitions is that you don't need, it's not contingent on capacity. You just need to stop, refrain. So there's nothing that you need to do. You just need to stop or refrain, and that should be most of the time easy within your capacity to just not do anything. But when it comes to positive actions, they're not always within your capacity. That's why he said, when I order you to do something, do of it as much as you can. Avoidance is generally easier than action. Avoidance is generally easier than action and not dependent on capacity. However, the claim that the category of avoiding prohibitions is inherently superior to category of complying with commands is incorrect. And Imam Taqiyuddin took his time to prove that the category of upholding commands is superior to the category of avoiding prohibitions. Why is this? Because he was addressing, during his times, he was addressing incapacity in the Muslim community. He was addressing pacifism, incapacity, inaction, and he's trying to motivate the people to be doers. This is a time when, the Crusaders have not yet completely left, and the Tatars have started to attack. And it was a time of great turmoil for Muslims. And many Muslims, Muslims felt that the Tatars were Ya'juj and Ma'juj, and they were just, they did not have, if you feel that they're Ya'juj and Ma'juj, you will not even have the energy to fight them. Who can fight Ya'juj and Ma'juj at the end of the day? So that was basically his concern. His concern is to motivate people to be actors, to be doers. And so he mentioned more than 30 evidences to prove that the category of commands is superior to the category of prohibitions. The greatest of deeds, he says, is to believe that La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Belief itself is a positive, affirmative act. It's not an avoidance. It's you need to believe and to accept, and and it is the recognition and acknowledgement of the heart and the attestation of the tongue, and this is all about positive, affirmative action, not simply avoidance, and that is the most the greatest of anything. The 5 pillars of Islam are all about acting. And none of Ahl Sunnah said that committing a prohibition takes you out of the deen. Is an act of disbelief. None of Ahl Sunnah said that unless the prohibition itself, is like desecrating the Mus'haf or something of that nature. But committing a prohibition per se is not a matter of disagreement among Ahl Sunnah, that it would not take you out of the fold of Islam, but abandoning some of the 4 pillars, at least it's subject to controversy, at least the subject of controversy. And we will not repeat this today, but the controversy is about abandoning the 4 altogether, abandoning jins al-amal, all actions, abandoning one of the 4, all of them would be weak except for abandoning the prayer. So weak in the sense of abandoning zakah alone, abandoning siyam alone, abandoning hajj alone would not be a strong controversy. The vast majority will say abandoning one of these alone is not an act of disbelief. Abandoning the prayer alone is subject to controversy. But in all honesty, I believe that it's more about limtina versus at-tark. Even when it comes to salah, it's not juhud. So you have the thing that is not usually mentioned is a layer between al-juhud, which is denial, rejection of the obligation, and at-tark, which is simply inaction. There is something called the limtina, which is to determinedly refrain, so like in salah, for instance, they bring you and tell you you'll have to pray, and then you refuse, you favor death over prayer. I don't think that this is simply a matter of tark, it's imtina, which is to be determined and not to pray. Anyway, so this is again another dalil that the category of commands is superior to the category of prohibitions. And then he mentions that the sin of Iblis was abandoning an obligation, and the sin of Adam was committing a prohibition, and the sin of Iblis is greater than the sin of Adam, right? One of them refused to prostrate, one of them ate from the tree. So one abandoned an obligation, another, committed a prohibition. And then he also said, good deeds erase bad deeds. Bad deeds do not erase good deeds. Good deeds, so when you perform an obligation, that's a good deed. It erases bad deeds, yes. Do bad deeds erase good deeds? No, they do not. So that's again another one on the superiority of commands, the category of commands over the category of prohibitions. So, and performing a good deed includes abstaining from bad deeds. Performing good deeds includes abstaining from bad deeds, because when you're praying, you're avoiding so much mischief, and you're, basically it entails avoidance of bad deeds, whereas the opposite is not true. In summary, a bad deed may sometimes be greater in magnitude, and there is no doubt that a good deed should be abandoned in its favor, as indicated in يسألونك عن الخمر والميسر قل فيهما اسم كبير ومنافع للناس. They ask you about wine and gambling. They say there is in them great sin and some benefit. So in this case, of course, you avoid the great harm, even at the expense of foregoing some benefits, of course. And the opposite may be true. The opposite may be true. You have greater benefit and smaller harm. And when you have greater benefit and smaller harm, some examples would be the Prophet ﷺ prohibiting people from sitting, hanging out on the roads or sitting on the road. And then they replied, these are our gatherings. We don't have any other way. Like we need to sit in our gatherings. So the Prophet ﷺ then said to them, then give the road its right. And then he mentioned the rights, lowering the gaze, refraining from harm, returning the greetings, enjoining what's good and forbidding what is bad. So here, the great benefits in them meeting and sitting together, we were going to basically tolerate some harm to procure that great benefit. And then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, uh, subhanallah, what's the beginning of the verse? فلا تقعدوا معهم حتى يخوضوا في حديث غيره إنكم إذا مثلهم إن الله جامع المنافقين والكافرين وقد نزل عليكم في الكتاب أن إذا سمعتم آيات الله يكفر بها ويستهزأ بها فلا تقعدوا معهم حتى يخوضوا في حديث غيره. And Allah had revealed to you in the book that if you hear the verses of Allah being mocked, being rejected and mocked, that you should not sit with them. So like you're sitting with a group of people that are kuffar and munafiqeen or this or that, and they mention the ayat of Allah in a way that is sarcastically, or they're rejecting this ayat of the Quran, or they are mocking the ayat of the Quran. You should not participate. You should not continue to sit down with them, and you should leave. But then Allah says what? فَلَا تَقْعُدُوا مَعَهُمْ حَتَّى يَخُوضُوا فِي حَدِيثٍ غَيْرِهِ إِنَّكُمْ إِذًا مِثْلُهُم. So don't sit with them until they engage in a different discussion. So Allah is saying what? That you can go back and sit with them. Isn't that really strange? Like, why would you go back and sit with them? Because human beings are social beings, and you need those. You need to mix with people, so you can't avoid mixing with people. But Allah wants you to not be involved with them or engage with them in their disbelief and mockery of ayatullah. So you avoid that and move away until they engage in a different discussion. Here, the harm of sitting with people, who were involved themselves, not just simply disbelievers, but disbelievers who were at some point involved in mocking the ayat of Allah. That the benefit of mixing with them was basically favored over the harm, because people need, to mix with other people. And then, so then it is clear when one basically outweighs the other. So the harm outweighs the benefit. You avoid the harm, even if you forgo the benefit. The benefit outweighs the harm. You attain the benefit, even if you have to tolerate the harm. What if they're equal? The benefit and the harm are equal. Does that happen in the external reality? So Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah says it doesn't happen in the external reality. And eventually anything out there has to have like a great, there has to be one of them will be greater. But whether or not that is true, this discussion, we don't need to get into this discussion. It's just like a philosophical discussion. But practically speaking, that happens in your mind anyway. It happens in your mind where you have this hesitation because, the benefit in your mind is equal to the harm. And since it happens in your mind, then we will have to say, in this scenario, repelling harm takes precedence over attaining or procuring benefit. That's when the qaida will apply. So does the fact that would Imam Taqiyuddin agree with this? Didn't he say that the category of commands takes precedence over the category of prohibitions? Would he agree that repelling harm, he never said explicitly denied this qaida. So we assume that he would agree with this. In addition to this, he would also agree with another similar qaida, which is the mana and the muqtadi. The mana and the muqtadi in the presence of a cause for abstention and a cause for action. He would agree that, like, the mule is still haram to eat because it's horse, half donkey. So, half horse, halal to eat, half donkey, haram to eat. So, but since it's half horse, half donkey, it is haram to eat. So he would agree with that. But like what may be, and he would agree also with the, one sister, like if your sister is mixed with another woman, that, you should abstain from both. There is like one application here that like he seems to have sided with the Shafi'is on salawat that al-asbab. So, salawat that al-asbab, prayers that have particular cause, not simply nafl, not simply unqualified nafl prayer, but prayers that have a certain cause. Can you pray them during the times of prohibition, like after Salat al-Asr? Can you pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid? You walk into the masjid, this is a prayer that has a certain cause. It is Tahiyyat al-Masjid, coming into the masjid. Can you pray the 2 rak'ahs Tahiyyat al-Masjid after Salat al-Asr? So the majority said no. I said yes. And there are two positions in the madhab. The dominant position is with the majority. No, you don't pray Salat Tahiyyat al-Masjid after Asr. You do not pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid after Asr. This is the dominant position in the madhab, and this is the Hanafi and Maliki position. Al-Shafi'i said, yes, you pray it. You pray it because, it's Salah, that's sabab. So Imam Taqiyuddin sided with the Shafi'is on this one. Is this motivated by, action being given precedence over inaction? Maybe, but he mentions like two things with regard to this particular one. That's why you can't always judge from one application, because they may have some other, reasons why they chose a particular position. He says that salawat that al-asbab, you will miss them completely if you don't do them in that particular time, because they are meant to be done in that particular time. You walk into the masjid and you don't pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid, that's it, it's missed. And he also said that, the times of prohibition are meant for sadd al-dhara'a. It's basically to block the means to evil. And since the kuffar used to pray during those times, then they were prohibited for us. But if you have a cause, if we're confident that, you're not imitating the kuffar, that there is something else motivating you to pray, aside from being a time of prohibition, there is something else motivating you to pray, Tahiyyat al-Masjid, it's motivating you to pray during this time, then that will overrule the time of prohibition. Anyway, I personally don't pray on the times, I don't pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid in the times of prohibition, in agreement with the dominant position in the madhab. It's also the position of the majority. I used to in the past, but I don't do it anymore. So there is always room for disagreement on these issues. So among the applications of this particular rule, repelling the harm takes precedence over procuring the benefit. Among the applications of this particular rule, the prohibition of cursing their false god. وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَيَسُبُّوا اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. And don't curse the gods they worship beside Allah, lest they would curse Allah, in hostility without knowledge. So here, cursing their gods, or insulting their gods, their idols, was prohibited because it can cause harm. They would curse or insult Allah. The owner of a property, as we said before, is not allowed to use his property in a way that will harm his neighbor, even though it is his property. Among the applications of prioritizing the greater benefit over the lesser harm, among the applications of prioritizing the greater benefit over the lesser harm, the Imam praying witr in the form of Maghrib. The Imam praying witr in the form of Maghrib. we've gone over this fatwa before. This is the fatwa of Imam Taqiyuddin, where he said, if you go to a Hanafi masjid and they ask you to pray witr, like the way Maghrib is prayed, the 3 rak'ahs together in the way the Maghrib is prayed. They say, by the way, that we don't pray it in the way the Maghrib is prayed because we recite in the 3rd rak'ah and stuff. And but anyway, the Malikis and Shafi'is and Hanbalis do not, they consider this to be reprehensible or makruh or disliked, to pray the Maghrib the way, to pray witr the way Maghrib is prayed. So they separate between the 2 and the 1. And if you're a Hanbali Imam who goes to a Hanafi masjid, Imam Taqiyuddin said, you pray the way they ask you to pray to reconcile hearts. To reconcile hearts, because he says reconciling hearts here would take precedence. So that is a benefit that is taking precedence over a prohibition. So the prohibition of likening al-witr to al-Maghrib, the benefit that will ensue from reconciling hearts takes precedence over the prohibition. If Muslim and non-Muslim corpses are mixed, I would think that this belongs to the next. I did make some rearrangement, and I added this to the next قاعدة, which is إذا تعارض المانع والمقتضي يقدم المانع إلا إذا كان المقتضي أعظم. When a cause for action and a cause for abstention conflict, the cause for abstention takes precedence unless the cause for action is of greater significance. So if Muslim and non-Muslim corpses are mixed together, you have a cause for action. The Muslims who need you to pray over them, you have a cause for abstention. The non-Muslims who you should not be offering final rights for them. So cause for action and cause for abstention coexisted here, and but you can't sort them out. The roof collapsed, and you have corpses that are mixed. You can't sort them out, so you pray over all of them. So you're given precedence here to action over inaction, right? So that would be from the exceptions of the next qaida. Then we talk also about the harm and the benefit. Appointing the most suitable person for each role is one example. So to prioritize the wicked and strong over the righteous and weak in a military post, for instance. So you have 2 potential commanders. One of them is wicked and strong, and one of them is righteous and weak. You choose which one? The wicked, because his wickedness is against him and his strength is for the believers. Whereas the righteous, and weak, his weakness is going to be against the believers, and his righteousness is for him. Yeah. Yeah, private wickedness, yeah. So the 4 imams permitted also a Muslim to plunge into enemy ranks, if the benefit will outweigh the harm. Plunge into enemy ranks, basically to disrupt the enemy ranks, to it is a way to bring about like shock and sort of to terrify them, even though your predominant assumption is that you'll be killed. Allowing lying for reconciliation also is another example. Lying to reconcile between people is another example where the benefit here was observed more than the harm. The benefit of reconciliation over the harm of lying. And then, so when you have like a family to support, and all the jobs that you're being offered are a little bit questionable, should you take a job that has like this a little bit dubious, questionable, and support your family, or not? But Imam Taqiyuddin would say you take the job, and he explains this. I mean, he's talking about, questionable. He's not talking about like, you know. So he says, and likewise, all people have obligations such as spending on themselves and their relatives, paying off their debts, and other responsibilities. If they neglect these, they are committing clear oppression. So if you neglect your family, if you don't pay off your debt, you don't support your family, you're committing clear oppression. However, if they fulfill these obligations under some doubt, their oppression is not definitive. So how can a Muslim avoid a potential wrongdoing by committing a definitive one? How can a Muslim avoid a potential wrongdoing by committing a definitive one? For this reason, Sa'id ibn Musayyab said, said, there is no good in someone who does not love wealth. There is no good. لا خير في من لا يحب المال. There is no good in someone who doesn't love wealth. With wealth, he worships his Lord, fulfills his trust, preserves himself, and becomes independent of others, or suffices himself and becomes independent of others. Of course, this has to be, understood within the proper framework and proper context. It does not mean that you never worry about halal or haram sources. He's talking about things that are dubious, not clearly haram. So he's talking about, the obligation of paying off your debt, supporting your family, sufficing yourself, protecting yourself from the humiliation of begging and all of that stuff. All of these are obligations. And if you have a dubious source of income, then there is potential harm here, but there is clear harm in neglecting your obligations. So you go for the potential harm versus the clear harm. Now, so I'll leave this up to you to decide whether we should, because we only have 3 minutes left. And I have the next qaida. This is the last qaida, and after that we will have like 10 minutes on exceptions, or maybe less. So the last subsidiary qaida under this major qaida is إذا تعارض المانع والمقتضي يقدم المانع إلا إذا كان المقتضي أعظم. When a cause for action and a cause for abstention conflict, the cause for abstention takes precedence unless the cause for action is of greater significance. Should we finish this and go like 20 minutes over, or should we stop here and do this next time before getting into the fourth qaida? So we need about 20 minutes to finish this part. So we either finish it now or finish it next time before, of course, it would take time from the next session. Yeah, we will cut the Q&A short. Finish? Okay. So because it's also related to, some of the applications even can basically overlap between the previous one, the harm and the benefit. Repelling the harm takes a precedence over procuring the benefit, if they're equal. Now, it's the same thing. We're talking about a cause for action and a cause for abstention, a cause for obligation and a cause for prohibition, a cause for, action, abstention, obligation, prohibition. If they conflict, they are there together. So giving precedence to prohibition over permission is a subset of prioritizing harm over benefit. Giving precedence to prohibition over permission is a subset of prioritizing harm over benefit. Why is that? Because we believe that in our Sharia, prohibition is linked to harm, and obligation is linked to benefit. So obligation and benefit come together hand in hand, and the same applies to prohibition and harm. So this principle can be, substantiated by the Prophet ﷺ saying, "Ma nahaytukum an shay'in fajtanibuh." When I forbid you from something, avoid it, and when I command you to do something, do of it as much as you can. So among the applications, among the applications, I have two witnesses. One of them testifies to the credibility of somebody. One of them testifies to the discrediting or jarh and ta'dil. So jarh and ta'dil. I have one witness testifies to the jarh, discrediting of somebody. One witness testifies to the ta'dil or credibility of somebody. Which one should I favor? I will favor jarh over ta'dil. Jarh over ta'dil. There is like a lengthy discussion, الجرح المفصل, التعديل المجمل, and so on. But let's say that they're equal, the jarh and ta'dil. One saying credible, one saying not credible. I will favor jarh over ta'dil, not credible over credible. Okay. If one sister is indistinguishable from another, or a properly slaughtered animal mixed with a not properly slaughtered animal. In this case, avoid action or inaction, avoidance or what? Proceeding. Avoidance, inaction. You stop. You don't marry, you don't eat. Okay, if one animal's appearance is lawful and another is unlawful, a horse marries a donkey, they have a mule together. So you eat the mule? No, because one parent is haram to eat. So you prioritize inaction over action, prohibition over permissibility in this case. And they mentioned another example, which is a sema. A sema, they thought a sema is basically the child of a hyena and a wolf. And I just, investigated this matter. You can't have a child, a hyena and a wolf cannot have a child together. They belong to two different families. So likely a sema is the wild African dog. And it's not really the child of a hyena and a horse. It's just a separate family. Child of a hyena and a wolf. But at any rate, if a trained hunting dog is sent but is joined by an untrained dog, do you eat or not eat? You don't eat because you don't know which one caught the animal, the trained or the untrained one. Voluntary prayers during the prohibited times, we've mentioned this. So you have a cause for action, Tahiyat al-Masjid. Cause for abstention, it's after Asr. So we've talked about this. So exceptions to this rule. So we said that if the sister that's indistinguishable from two or women, but what if she's indistinguishable from a large tribe? Then in this case you can marry. What if it is 10? She's indistinguishable from 10 women. Then they disagree. And sometimes people always want like definitive answers, and so Imam Ahmad sometimes would not shy away from saying, I don't know. So this is like, the slaughtered animal, improperly slaughtered animal is mixed with 2 sheep. Avoid. What about 3? He said, I don't know. Imam Ahmad said, I don't know. But anyway, people want you to be more definitive all the time. Some consider dealing with someone whose wealth is mixed between lawful and unlawful to be an exception to this rule. An exception to this rule. So when someone's wealth is mixed, part lawful, part unlawful, should you eat from their money, or then they disagree over this. They disagree over this. And if you believe like the Hanafis that the prohibition will not extend beyond the first ownership, which is the haram acquisition. First ownership was through haram acquisition. If you believe that it doesn't extend beyond the first ownership through haram acquisition, and there are some statements of Imam Ahmad that would indicate that he also believes in that where he talks about karaha, disliking, and stops short of prohibiting, but simply disliking you consuming that wealth. Also books of tafsir, when they allow you, this is an exception from the qaida, when they allow you to touch books of tafsir without wudu. So books of tafsir, they have both Quran, non-Quran, and then, so if we're talking here about a prohibition and permissibility, something, prohibition and permissibility, then sometimes we will favor the prohibition over the permissibility, sometimes the permissibility over the prohibition. Mostly, we will favor the prohibition over the permissibility. It becomes a little bit problematic when you're talking about prohibition versus obligation. So by default, prohibition versus permissibility, you will favor the prohibition over the permissibility. There are a few exceptions, but by default, you will favor the prohibition over the permissibility. What if we're talking about a prohibition and obligation, not a prohibition and permissibility? So, the dog, 2 dogs, prohibition and permissibility, right? The mule, reason for prohibition, reason for permissibility. There is no obligation to eat horses. It's just permissibility. Okay, but what if we're talking about the conflict between prohibition and obligation? Some of these examples would be what? Praying in a usurped land. Praying in a usurped land. You have the obligation to pray. You have the prohibition from... You have the prohibition of praying in a usurped land. Okay. Prohibition, when the conflict is between prohibition and obligation, like praying in a usurped land. You have command to pray, prohibition from praying in a usurped land or an impure land. Will you pray? Yes, you will pray. You will favor the obligation here over the prohibition. Another one would be exhuming graves, so if you bury someone without washing, exhuming graves there is a great prohibition. But if you bury someone without washing, do not bury them facing the Qibla. Would you take them out and wash them? I mean, of course, they didn't decompose yet. But would you take them out and wash them? Would you reorient them towards the Qibla? Then, according to the madhab, yes. A woman who's stuck in a foreign land, a land of war, can she travel alone? Yes, she can travel alone. If the deceased among Muslims and non-Muslims are mixed, this is the thing that we talked about before, mixed corpses, cause for action, cause for inaction, but you have an obligation here versus a prohibition, not simply permissibility, obligation versus prohibition. You will give precedence to the obligation. And so it seems like what? It seems like when it is obligation versus prohibition, you're often favoring the obligation. When it is prohibition versus permissibility, you're often favoring the prohibition, over the permissibility, but it's different from obligation versus prohibition versus obligation. You will still often favor the obligation. Now, if you can separate between them, if you sell wine and vinegar in one safqa is when you do this. Like safqa is a transaction, in other words. So if you have this is called tafriq al-safqa, which is to separate between the 2 items in one transaction. If you sell vinegar and wine in one transaction, then there is disagreement in the madhab whether this sale is all batil, or you could make tafriq al-safqa, you separate, because the prohibition applies to one thing, not the other. So there are 2 different positions in the madhab. this is all batil, invalid transaction, or I will separate, validate this, and invalidate that. And then the last thing, and good, we just need 5 more minutes. Last thing to talk about here is exceptions from this qaida. Exceptions from which one? La darar wa la dirar. There is no harm and there is no reciprocation of harm. So I'm just going to read this. In truth, if we understand the principle and its applications, we cannot find any true exceptions to it. We cannot find any true exceptions to it. Why did they say that? For there is no harm in the Sharia except that it has been prescribed to bring about a benefit or to ward off a greater harm. So if you understand the qaida well and you understand the intricacies of the qaida, there is no harm in the Sharia except that it has been prescribed, so the hudud, for instance, harm or not. Of course, when you cut off someone's hand, that's harm. But there is no harm prescribed in the Sharia except to bring about a greater benefit or to ward off a greater harm. Punishing criminals despite the harm it may cause them serves to prevent a broader and greater harm. The same applies to jihad and expiations, which are legislated to purify individuals from sins and misdeeds. Whoever recognizes that there is something beyond the material, more significant and honorable, understand the benefits of expiations. So we're not utilitarian in the sense of Benthamite utilitarianism. Because of Benthamite utilitarianism does not recognize anything beyond matter. So our utilitarianism is the divinely guided moral utilitarianism, or you could say religious utilitarianism. So utilitarianism, why? Because we say that, prohibitions are, linked to harms and obligations are linked to benefits. So it is still about harm and benefit. But who decides? God decides. Whoever recognizes that there is something beyond the material, more significant and honorable, understands the benefits of expiations. However, one may mistakenly perceive harm to be greater than another, in which case the Sharia comes to correct such assumptions. Several examples of what we referred to as exceptions have already been mentioned. So if you go under each one of these maxims and subsidiary maxims, you will find what we called exceptions. But at the end of the day, the rule is consistent, the maxim is consistent. The Sharia always wards off the greater harm, and whenever harm is prescribed, this is to procure a greater benefit or to ward off a greater harm. We'll come back at 9:20, inshallah. Oh, no. Let's